when an athlete or a team's backs are against the wall, that's when you find out the stuff that they're made of. You find out if they are championship material. And we have to say this. After Game 1 of the NBA Finals, it didn't look good for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Most people, myself included, automatically jumped on the bandwagon that this series was as good as done. And understandably so. A Cavs team that really had no business losing found a way to lose. And a Warriors team that in many ways had no business winning found a way to win. And when you combine that with the fact that you're talking about the Kyrie Irving injury and the fact that he fractured his kneecap and was going to be out the rest of the series for a team that was already depleted, things only got worse. It looked like it was going to be basically LeBron and a few other jabronis, and they were going to get their brains bashed in the rest of the series by the Golden State Warriors. But ultimately, that's why they play the games. And you look at what happened in Game 2, you found out that the Cavaliers aren't pretenders. At least for one night, they were contenders. And now we've got a series on our hands as the Cleveland Cavaliers, even despite themselves, in a situation where, frankly, they had no business winning this game, they still found a way to win it. And in spite of all the bad things the Warriors did and all the things that went wrong for them, they really had no business ultimately losing this game, and they still found a way to lose it. It's just what happens. And, a lot of people are going to look at the first 2 games of this year's NBA Finals and point to just how great this series has been. This is the first time in NBA history you've had the first 2 games of a series go to overtime, and they feel like classic games. Well, let's not kid ourselves. It hasn't been the highest quality of basketball. And Game 2 was really bad. What it was, though, was Game 2 was so bad in terms of the quality and style of play that it ended up becoming good. It transcended the bad and crossed over to the other side to where it was almost like amusingly, entertainingly good. And it ended up becoming a bit of what you might classify as an instant classic. But it wasn't an instant classic because of quality of play, that's for sure. But it doesn't matter. If you're the Cleveland Cavaliers, you had to find a way to win Game 2 when you should have won Game 1. You had to be able to wrestle away home court advantage from the Golden State Warriors. You had to get that momentum, and you frankly had to put the pressure back on the heavily favored Golden State Warriors and give them some doubts about whether or not they are a championship team. And at the end of the day, that's what the Cavaliers were able to do, and my hat's off to them because so many things pointed to this team having every reason to just roll over and die. So many things pointed to this potentially being a sweep, especially with the loss of Kyrie Irving. But again, that's why they play the game. So let's look at this a little bit deeper. Why did the Cavs lose, and why did the Cavs win, and why did the Warriors lose? And what did we ultimately learn from game number 2? Well, let's look first at the positives for the Cavaliers and why they ultimately won this game. I know a lot of people are going to talk about the fouls that weren't called in favor of LeBron James, the lack of star treatment that he got and everything else. But let's not kid ourselves here. LeBron James went to the free throw line 18 times in game number 2. The Cleveland Cavaliers had 40 free throw attempts to the Warriors' 25. So the Cavaliers definitely got their fair share of calls. And I don't care what anybody says. Just like back in the day with Jordan or a Kobe Bryant or what have you, you get some benefit of the doubt when it comes to calls if you're getting to the free throw line 18 times. Now, part of that was because of LeBron being aggressive early and staying aggressive throughout, including into the fourth quarter and even into the overtime period, whereas in Game 1, he started to get a little more passive because of fatigue, and it was understandable. In Game 2, though, there was none of that. He played over 50 minutes, but he stayed aggressive throughout. And that's what was impressive about this performance to me by LeBron James. It wasn't an incredibly efficient performance. He went 11 of 35 from the field, but he did a little bit of everything that his team needed him to do. He was the focal point of their offense. He was able to facilitate for others. He ended up with a triple-double. You're talking about, 34 points, I think, 16 rebounds, 11 assists. He was everywhere. He was that dominant force. He was that utility man for the Cavaliers. They needed everything. He gave them a little bit of everything. So again, not a masterpiece and not one of LeBron's best, most dominant games from an efficiency standpoint and an effectiveness standpoint. but it was one of the best games I've ever seen LeBron James play in terms of understanding that even when you're not at your best, you have to do things to be able to slow the game down. You have to be able to find way to get your points, be able to create opportunities for others. You have to hit the glass. You have to do all of these different things. One of the best games I've ever seen LeBron James play, period. It's not always just about the points. It's not always necessarily about the field goal percentage, even though at some point in time that lack of efficiency in LeBron scoring could end up costing this team long term. You know, you're talking about a guy that took 35 shots on the heels of taking 38 shots in game number 1. At some point in time, that will catch up with the Cavaliers if they're not careful. But you have to respect LeBron, I think, for what he did in this game. And for those of you that think I'm just a big LeBron James hater, you'll notice I just devoted plenty of time here to talking about the good things that LeBron did in Game 2, because he was a big reason, obviously, why this team won. And again, for those of you that want to bitch about this call not being made or that call not being made, you know, you could sit there, you talk about late in the game in regulation when he didn't get the foul call. You know, are we going to ignore the fact that he took like 6 steps before he ever got fouled to begin with? The referees were bad in this game, and it was bad on both sides. So if you're a Cavs fan, stop bitching about it. If you're a Warriors fan, stop bitching about it. It really didn't have that much impact ultimately on the game. It really didn't. One thing that did have an impact on this game, though, was Matthew Dellavedova and his defense on Steph Curry. I mean, Curry went 5 for 23 from the field, including 2 of 15 from 3. That's horrible. This is one of the worst games I think I've ever seen Steph Curry play. And there's no doubt that played a role in the Cavaliers winning. You can't take away from that. You know, Steph Curry is the league's MVP, and he goes 5 for 23, 2 of 15 from 3. The best shooter in the league, one of the best shooters ever, goes 2 of 15 from three-point range, 5 of 23. And part of that was a credit to Dellavedova and his defense on Steph Curry. He got in his face. They didn't always switch off of Curry. You know, he challenged Curry, made him take some bad, dumb, stupid shots. It had a big impact, as did the Cavaliers' performance on the boards in game number 2, where game number 1, they didn't have the dominance over the boards on the Warriors that they should have, based off of the size they have in guys like Tristan Thompson and Mozgov and even LeBron James. The Cavaliers in game 2 had, you know, great performances on the boards from LeBron, from Tristan Thompson, from Mozgov. And that really helped make a difference on a night where this team shot 32% from the field. Again, 32% from the field. The Cavaliers were able to slow the tempo. They were able to make it a physical game. They basically made it ugly Eastern Conference basketball. It's the only way the Cavaliers have any chance in the world of winning this series is to do a lot of what they did in game number 2 and hope they could shoot a little bit better than 32% from the field. But that's exactly what they were able to do. They slowed down the tempo. They got physical. They were more aggressive. They made it an Eastern Conference basketball game. Plain and simple. If the Warriors make it a Western Conference game, it's a 2-0 series. The Cavaliers were able to slow down that tempo very, very well, even better than what they did in game number 1, and that's why the series is knotted up heading to Cleveland on Tuesday night for game number 3. And then you look at Mozgov, too. Here's a guy that had double-digit free throw attempts, that was efficient from the field. You know, Mozgov has been a really good player for the Cavaliers the first 2 games of this series. A lot of reasons pointing to the Cavaliers winning this game, besides just the fact that the Warriors screwed the pooch and lost this game. But they did. There's no doubt about that. And some of the biggest reasons why the Warriors lost are as follows. Steph Curry, the league's MVP, the focal point of their offense, their top guy, went 5 of 23 from the field, 2 of 15 from 3. You know, I could sit there and talk about LeBron going 35 from the field, not being incredibly efficient, but he made some big shots when he needed to. Steph Curry, except for that one layup where he tied the game in regulation, he was just off. He was just terrible. He was rushing shots. You look at overtime, he threw up an air ball. When do you see Steph Curry throw up an air ball? And you look at Draymond Green, a guy that everybody talks about his value and his importance to the team. He didn't make a field goal attempt until overtime, and that was a putback. He went 2 of 7. He only had 7 shot attempts, and on top of that, he only made 2 of them. This is your 3rd best player, and he's 2 of 7 from the field. For a team that we talk so much about their depth and their advantage on the bench compared to the Cavaliers, and there clearly is one, it didn't really manifest itself in game number 2, that's for sure. Only 17 points from the bench. Only 17. When you look at game number 1, and Livingston played well, and Iguodala was outstanding, In this game, they weren't so much. Iguodala's defense was good, but he really wasn't much offensively. Livingston didn't play as much. 17 total bench points. That's just not going to get it done from a Golden State Warriors standpoint. Neither will their 8 of 35 from three-point range. This is a team that lives in a lot of ways by the three-point shot. And at times when you live by the three-point shot, you're also going to die by the three-point shot. And there is no doubt that the Warriors died a slow, brutal death from three-point range in game number 2. Yes, Steph Curry going 2 of 15 from 3 most certainly didn't help those figures. But again, 8 of 35 from three-point range. 8 of 35. You're going to have a hard time winning a lot of basketball games regardless if it's regular season or the NBA Finals shooting that type of a percentage from 3. I also look at the Warriors too. They had some bad breaks. Like you look at one play late in the game coming off of Draymond Green with that phenomenal block on LeBron James when he drove to the hole. The ball gets tipped around, and then it goes through Steph Curry's legs and out of bounds, and the Cavaliers get the ball back. It's those type of plays right there. The Spates missed dunk, where everybody's going to talk about that missed dunk and how big it was. And it was. What surprised me is more people haven't questioned why the hell Iguodala, a guard who's a great finisher himself at the rim, would sit there and pass the ball on the open floor to a guy like Spates. Why in the hell would you do that? You had a clear path to the hoop. It's bad breaks like that, but also, talking about Iguodala, just one of many examples for the Warriors in game number 2 of at times they were their own worst enemy. They really, really, really had poor shot selection throughout game number 2 and some really, really bad decision making. How many times you would see the Warriors jack up a shot 6 or 7 seconds into the shot clock, which at times is okay, but they weren't good shots. They weren't quality shots. And they were done a lot of times at times where the Cavaliers had momentum, and all you're doing is breaking your own back when you miss those shots. And here's ultimately what we learned from this series, is that it's not over. Game number 2 showed you that this is a series still, that the Cavaliers have a chance. Now, I still believe the Warriors will win this series, and it still wouldn't surprise me if the Warriors won this series in 5 games still. Because you look at last year's finals, if you remember with the Heat, the Heat were able to win game 2, I believe it was, against the Spurs. You're sitting there 1-1, and then the Spurs rolled over the Heat the next 3 games, basically, and the Heat were done. They basically quit. It's maybe hard to envision it at this point based off of the closeness of these first 2 games, but at some point in time you would have to think that lack of depth for the Cavaliers and that lack of players getting it done around LeBron James, and even LeBron James's number of minutes and amount of energy that's been expended and his lack of efficiency is going to eventually catch up. But another thing that's catching up with somebody is the Golden State Warriors and their lack of championship experience. I can point to all these things with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that's all well and good, it's established. But you look at the Warriors, game 2 was a clear-cut example of a team lacking in championship experience. When you talk about those teams that understand what it takes to win a championship, they know what it takes, they understand it, they get the moment. You don't see the questionable decision-making and shot selection to the level that you did with the Warriors in game number 2. Also, with the Warriors and some of the bad breaks they had and some of the bad breaks they made for themselves, championship teams understand, sometimes how to just make that play happen, if that makes sense. Something I used to see the Bulls in the 90s do all the time. So many times in the playoffs, it looked like they should lose games, and they found a way to win. And that's something that at times you question about the Golden State Warriors because of that lack of championship experience. Sometimes the only way you're going to get that is to earn it, and you got to win it. But you look at the Warriors in this situation, that lack of championship experience really shows. Now, to be fair in this game, as much as the Warriors lost it, the Cavaliers won it, it goes both ways. I could sit there and say, for the Warriors standpoint, you had a team that was against the ropes. Their backs were against the wall. You can't sit there and allow LeBron and the Cavaliers to stay in that game. You're in Golden State. You're at home. You've got momentum. You just won a potentially back-breaking game number 1 overtime victory over the Cavaliers. They just lost Kyrie Irving for the rest of the playoffs. You've got to jump on them. You've got to be on them early, and you've got to eliminate any doubt. And the Warriors failed to do that. They allowed the Cavaliers to dominate this game in so many different capacities, even though the Warriors kept fighting, and hats off to them because they kept coming. They didn't roll over that last couple minutes of regulation when they were down 11 points when a lot of other teams would have. They found a way to tie that game up and go to overtime where they had a chance to potentially win. So hats off to them as well, but It's on the Warriors for not coming out and starting off better. You have to put the Cavs away early. You have to dominate game number 2. Championship teams would have won this game by 20 to 25 points going away with it. The problem is they allowed LeBron and the Cavaliers to stick around. They let them start believing. They let them get into a rhythm. They let them control the tempo. And that's a big reason why this series is knotted up. And ultimately, that's what it's going to come down to the rest of the series, starting game number 3 Tuesday night. It's the team who controls the tempo that wins the series. If the Cavaliers are allowed to continue to make this an ugly Eastern Conference style of basketball, they can win this series. They definitely can win this series as soon as game 6. If the Warriors are able to play a more efficient, up-tempo Western Conference style of basketball and utilize their depth more appropriately like they did in game number 1 as opposed to game number 2, then they can run the Cavaliers off the floor. And they can make this a no-doubt series still in soon as 5 games. That's what it's all about at this point in time. We could talk about the stars and their performances. You got to be honest here. The Cavaliers were able to face a team in the Warriors who had the MVP of the league go 5 of 23 from the field, including 2 of 15 from 3. Their third best player was 2 of 7 from the field and didn't hit a field goal attempt until a putback in freaking overtime. So many things went bad for the Warriors. So in a lot of ways, the Cavaliers were fortunate to win game 2. But they got it done, and that's ultimately what matters. It's not how you do it, it's if you do it, and the Cavaliers were able to do it. It's all going to be about which team can dictate and control tempo and style of play. That's who's going to win the series. If the Cavaliers are able to do that, they're able to slow things down. They'll be able to mask their lack of depth. They'll be able to mask many things, and they'll be able to get the Warriors out of their comfort zone. And when they can do that, they have a shot. If the Warriors can get back to playing like they did in the regular season with a little bit better decision-making and shot selection and having maybe some of those shots go down, this is still a series that could get ugly in a hurry, and the Warriors could dominate games 3, 4, and 5 and end it in 5. So it's all about. I don't care what anybody else is going to talk about, this star versus that star and everything else. Now with the Cavaliers, yes, they were a reflection of LeBron James, and they were much more aggressive, I thought, in game number 2, even more so than game 1, and they were a reflection of their leader, LeBron James. This to me could be that seminal performance for LeBron in the sense that even if his team loses this series, which I still expect him to do, I'd frankly be stunned if he wasn't named the NBA Finals MVP. And number 2, I think it would be hard for a lot of people to knock him in his performance because even though this is a guy that's been to the finals 5 straight times and 6 times total in his career, a guy that's won 2 NBA championships, you'd be hard-pressed to tell me that he's ever performed better at the game's highest level than he is this year in this series, even with the fact that he shot 11 for 35 in game number 2. So let me know what you thought about game number 2 and what you expect to see in game number 3 and the rest of the series and what you think are the keys to victory for both the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. I can't wait to see your thoughts in the comments section below.